In his compelling memoir, Spare, Prince Harry candidly addresses a pervasive and deeply personal rumor that has shadowed his life: the speculation that his biological father is not King Charles III but rather Princess Diana's former lover, James Hewitt. Welcome viewers to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. This particular detail is just one of many instances in the book where Harry confronts the relentless tabloid narratives and public gossip he has been forced to endure in silence for decades. By directly tackling this subject, he aims to set the record straight and expose the cruelty behind the sensationalism. A dark and unfunny joke. Harry reveals that this rumor wasn't just confined to the pages of tabloids. It was also a topic of conversation within the royal family itself. He writes that his own father, King Charles, would repeatedly make jokes about the situation. Harry quotes Charles's dark humor: "Who knows if I'm really the Prince of Wales? Who knows if I'm even your real father? Maybe your real father is in Broadmoor, darling boy." This reference to a high-security psychiatric hospital adds a layer of disturbing irony to the joke, highlighting how the rumor was weaponized to mock and undermine him. According to Harry, his father would laugh and laugh after telling this joke. Harry, however, found it to be a remarkably unfunny joke, given the rumor circulating just then that my actual father was one of Mummy's former lovers, Major James Hewitt. This specific memory underscores the emotional pain and frustration Harry felt, having to bear the weight of such a baseless and cruel suggestion, even from a parent. The origins and perpetuation of a lie. Harry delves into the supposed reasons for the rumor's longevity, identifying two key factors. The first, he notes, is the striking physical resemblance between himself and Hewitt, particularly their flaming ginger hair. This shared trait became the visual proof for those who chose to believe the lie. The second factor, according to Harry, is something far more sinister: a form of sadism from the public and the media. He explains that tabloid readers were delighted by the idea that the younger child of Prince Charles wasn't the child of Prince Charles. For them, the rumor was more than a story, it was a source of entertainment that seemed to validate their own struggles. Harry suggests that perhaps the public found some twisted comfort in believing that a young prince's life was just as laughable and chaotic as their own. Both Prince Harry and James Hewitt have publicly and emphatically denied these claims. In an interview from 2017, Hewitt himself stated that the rumor only persists because it sells papers. He expressed sympathy for Harry, recognizing the poor chap must have to deal with the story's constant resurfacing, which is worse for him probably. The entire episode serves as a powerful microcosm of the toxic relationship between the British press and the royal family. It highlights how a completely fabricated story, debunked by simple facts: Harry was born in 1984, 3 years before Diana and Hewitt even met, can still take root and become a persistent, painful part of a person's public identity. Harry's decision to address this in his memoir is not just about clearing his name, it's about reclaiming his narrative from the media and the public who have controlled it for so long. It is a testament to the emotional toll that living a life under such intense scrutiny can take. Every rumor has a birthplace. Some emerge from a careless remark, some from deliberate deception, and some from the imagination of a society hungry for scandal. The rumor about Prince Harry's paternity did not spring fully formed from the minds of millions. It began as a whisper, a subtle suggestion that slowly grew louder until it became impossible to ignore. To understand its origin, we must go back to the cultural, social, and political climate of the early 1980s, a time when the royal family was both revered and dissected in equal measure. When Prince Harry was born on September 15, 1984, the world greeted the arrival of Diana and Charles's second son with jubilation. The press captured every detail: Diana leaving the hospital, the tiny bundle wrapped in a white blanket, the beaming smile of a young mother. In those early days, no one questioned his lineage. The world saw him as the spare to Prince William's heir, another link in the centuries-old chain of succession. Yet even in the glow of public celebration, there were already fault lines in the marriage of Charles and Diana. Charles's long-standing relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, which had never fully disappeared even after his marriage, was an open secret in aristocratic circles. Diana, meanwhile, was increasingly isolated within the rigid structures of royal life. Their marriage, while celebrated publicly, was fraying behind the palace walls. This context mattered, because in the absence of visible harmony, the public and press alike began searching for signs of discord. It was this relentless scrutiny that created fertile soil for rumors to grow. The earliest comparisons between young Harry and James Hewitt did not come immediately. They surfaced later, as Diana's personal struggles and eventual confessions became public knowledge. But what made those comparisons stick was something superficial yet powerful: appearance. Harry's bright red hair, so unlike Charles's darker features, became the visual shorthand for suspicion. In a culture where images often carried more weight than facts, the physical resemblance between Harry and Hewitt, at least in the minds of some observers, was irresistible. Still, one must ask, why would such a theory take root so quickly? After all, children in the Windsor line had historically displayed a range of hair colors, from blonde to auburn to darker shades. Genetic variation was hardly a new phenomenon. But the 1980s and 1990s were a golden age of tabloid sensationalism in Britain. Newspapers competed ruthlessly for circulation, and scandal involving the royal family sold copies like nothing else. If Charles's coldness toward Diana and his attachment to Camilla provided one angle, then the suggestion of Diana's own indiscretions opened another. The tabloids were not content with a fractured marriage, they craved a storyline that hinted at betrayal and illegitimacy, a narrative that threatened the sanctity of the monarchy itself. It is important to remember that James Hewitt was not initially a household name. He was a cavalry officer, respectable but not remarkable. His association with Diana transformed him into an object of fascination. Their affair, beginning in the mid to late 1980s, was not publicly known when Harry was born. Only later, when Diana herself admitted to her relationship with Hewitt, did the timeline come under scrutiny. For those who believed in the rumor, the mere existence of the affair was enough to blur chronology. For the tabloids, the distinction between before Harry's birth and after Harry's birth was inconvenient detail. The mere overlap of Diana and Hewitt's names in the same sentence was fuel enough. The whisper began in exclusive circles, where gossip about the royals was passed like contraband at dinner parties. Aristocrats and insiders speculated quietly, knowing that in Britain's class-driven society, rumor often traveled faster than truth. Journalists caught wind of these murmurs and, emboldened by the growing tabloid culture, began planting suggestive headlines. At first, they did not accuse directly, they hinted. Phrases like, striking resemblance, curious timing, and family likeness were sprinkled into articles, nudging the public to draw their own conclusions. As the whispers became more audible, photographs began to play their part. Side-by-side images of young Harry and James Hewitt were placed in print, encouraging readers to see what editors wanted them to see. It did not matter that such comparisons were subjective, nor that countless children bore little resemblance to their fathers without raising questions. The human mind is prone to pattern recognition, and once primed to look for similarity, readers found it. The red hair became the symbol, the shorthand, the supposed evidence that required no further explanation. But behind the fascination with hair color and facial features lay something deeper, a cultural obsession with Diana herself. Diana had become the most photographed woman in the world, and with that fame came a relentless appetite for stories that cast her as tragic, rebellious, or scandalous. The possibility that she had borne a child with another man fit perfectly into the narrative the tabloids were eager to build. She was already portrayed as the wronged wife, the glamorous princess trapped in an unhappy marriage. To paint her as the lover who shook the royal bloodline was the next step in heightening her legend. For Harry, none of this context mattered in his childhood years. He was simply a boy growing up under extraordinary circumstances. But the rumor was already taking shape in the adult world around him. Even before he was old enough to understand, forces were aligning to question the very foundation of his identity. In retrospect, what is most striking is how little the factual timeline seemed to matter to those spreading the rumor. Diana and Hewitt did not meet until 1986, 2 years after Harry's birth. Yet the truth was less appealing than the scandal. A good story, once planted, can survive without water. It feeds on curiosity, repetition, and the human tendency to believe the sensational over the mundane. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the whisper had become a murmur, repeated often enough to be considered plausible by those predisposed to mistrust the monarchy. For Republicans in Britain, who viewed the royal family as an outdated institution, the rumor provided ammunition. For royalists, it was either an embarrassment to dismiss or a guilty pleasure to entertain in private. Either way, it ensured that Harry's lineage was never discussed solely in terms of heritage and tradition, but in terms of speculation and doubt. The question then becomes, why Harry? Why did this rumor cling to him more than any other royal child? The answer lies partly in appearance, partly in timing, and partly in narrative convenience. Harry looked different enough to invite questions. His mother's affair with Hewitt provided a character to link him with. And the growing appetite for royal scandal meant that any theory, however flimsy, could gain traction. The rumor was not simply about Harry, it was about the monarchy's vulnerability, Diana's defiance, and the press's relentless pursuit of drama. What began as a whisper at dinner parties and in newsrooms eventually became a staple of tabloid coverage. It was repeated so often that it acquired the weight of possibility. By the time Harry was old enough to read the papers himself, the rumor had already lived a life longer than his childhood. It was embedded in the culture, waiting for him at every turn. The whisper had become a roar, and for Harry, there was no escaping its echo. This is where the origin of the whisper leaves us, with a rumor born not out of truth, but out of circumstance, timing, and society's hunger for scandal. A rumor that took root because it was simple to believe, easy to repeat, and too sensational to ignore. And as we shall see in the chapters that follow, the consequences of that whisper would shape not only Harry's life, but the way the world saw him, for decades to come. Every story of rumor and speculation needs a central figure around whom the narrative revolves, and in the case of Prince Harry's contested lineage, that figure was James Hewitt. To the casual observer, Hewitt might appear an unlikely candidate for such an infamous role. He was not a public figure of great influence, not a politician, nor an aristocrat with centuries of heritage behind him. He was a military officer, respectable but unremarkable in the grand scheme of Britain's elite. Yet his relationship with Princess Diana ensured that his name would forever be tied to one of the most enduring scandals in modern royal history. To understand how James Hewitt entered Diana's life, we must first understand who he was before the glare of publicity altered his image. Born in 1958 into a military family, Hewitt followed the well-trodden path of service that defined his upbringing. He joined the Life Guards, a regiment of the Household Cavalry, and quickly became known as disciplined, charming, and approachable. He embodied many of the qualities admired in British officers of the time: good manners, dedication to duty, and a kind of easy charisma that made him socially comfortable in aristocratic circles. It was in the mid-1980s, a period of personal turbulence for Princess Diana, that Hewitt entered the royal orbit. By then, Diana was deeply entrenched in her role as the Princess of Wales but was privately struggling. Her marriage to Prince Charles was becoming more strained by the day. Charles's ongoing emotional involvement with Camilla Parker Bowles left Diana feeling abandoned and unwanted. Within the rigid confines of palace life, she had little room for authentic companionship or emotional support. The people around her were either courtiers with their own loyalties or members of the royal family bound by duty and restraint. In this void, Diana longed for someone who would see her as a woman rather than an institution, someone who would listen without judgment and care without calculation. James Hewitt became that someone. Their paths crossed when Diana sought writing lessons, a pastime that provided her a sense of freedom away from the suffocating expectations of royal life. Hewitt, with his military bearing and gentle humor, proved an attentive instructor. More importantly, he became a confidant. Diana was known for her openness, her ability to connect emotionally with people regardless of background, and in Hewitt she found a receptive listener. What began as friendship soon blossomed into something more intimate. By Diana's own admission, their relationship developed in the late 1980s, well after Harry's birth in 1984. This timeline is critical, because it undermines the foundation of the rumor that Harry might be Hewitt's son. Yet at the time, when the affair eventually came to light, the public was less interested in dates and more fascinated by the scandal itself. The image of Diana, the world's most photographed woman, engaging in a secret romance with a cavalry officer was irresistible fodder for tabloids. For Diana, the affair was more than mere escapism. It was, according to friends and confidants, a genuine emotional bond. She once described Hewitt as someone she loved deeply, someone who provided her with the affection and reassurance she so desperately craved. Unlike the cold formality of palace life, her time with Hewitt was filled with warmth, laughter, and a sense of being understood. In many ways, he offered the stability and devotion that her marriage to Charles had failed to provide. It is important to note that Diana's involvement with Hewitt did not occur in isolation. Charles's relationship with Camilla was already an open secret, and Diana herself had other emotional entanglements, including close friendships that skirted the boundaries of royal propriety. The royal marriage by this stage was less a partnership and more a stage-managed arrangement, in which both husband and wife sought fulfillment elsewhere. Within this context, Diana's affair with Hewitt was neither surprising nor extraordinary. What made it explosive was her status, her visibility, and the relentless appetite of the media for anything that hinted at betrayal. When the affair became public knowledge in the 1990s, it was largely through revelations in tell-all books and Diana's own candid admissions. The press devoured the story, portraying Hewitt as both lover and opportunist. He was alternately depicted as a romantic hero who gave Diana what she lacked, and as a reckless figure who endangered her reputation by speaking too freely. What cemented his role in the public imagination, however, was not the affair itself but the timing attached to it. The revelation that Diana had loved Hewitt provided the missing ingredient for those eager to believe the rumor about Harry's paternity. Superficially, the pieces seemed to fit. Harry had red hair, as did Hewitt. Diana and Hewitt had been involved. Charles and Diana's marriage was broken. For a public eager to piece together a scandal, the details aligned conveniently enough to create a narrative that, though factually impossible, felt emotionally plausible. People wanted to believe it because it dramatized the larger story of royal dysfunction. It was not just about Harry's hair, it was about a monarchy that seemed increasingly out of step with the real emotions of its members. The media played its role with ruthless efficiency. Tabloids ran sensational headlines, hinting without outright declaring. Photos of Hewitt were printed alongside images of Harry, encouraging readers to draw their own conclusions. Talk shows and gossip columns repeated the story until it acquired the momentum of inevitability. For many readers, the distinction between rumor and fact became irrelevant. What mattered was the thrill of believing that the royal family harbored a secret so scandalous it could destabilize the line of succession. Hewitt himself did little to help. At times, he attempted to set the record straight, insisting that his relationship with Diana began after Harry's birth. At other times, whether through careless phrasing or deliberate ambiguity, he fed the speculation. In interviews and books, he sometimes appeared to bask in the notoriety that his association with Diana brought him. Critics accused him of exploiting their relationship for personal gain, while supporters argued that he had simply fallen victim to the insatiable demands of the media. Either way, his words often had the unintended effect of keeping the rumor alive. For Diana, the revelation of her affair with Hewitt was both liberating and damaging. On one hand, it humanized her, showing the world that she sought love and comfort like anyone else. On the other hand, it gave the press ammunition to question her integrity, her role as a mother, and her influence on her sons. In the brutal arithmetic of public opinion, her vulnerabilities were transformed into weapons against her. And for Harry, though still young at the time, the seeds of doubt were sown in the public mind, seeds that would grow into a decades-long shadow. The entry of James Hewitt into Diana's life was, in many ways, inevitable given her circumstances. She was lonely, desperate for affection, and surrounded by a world that reduced her to a role rather than a person. Hewitt offered companionship and understanding, qualities that she had been denied in her marriage. Yet his presence became more than just a personal refuge, it became the fulcrum upon which one of the most enduring royal rumors would balance. What is remarkable, when looking back, is how little the actual facts of their relationship mattered in the long run. The timeline, the context, the emotional reality, all of these were overshadowed by a single, seductive idea, that Diana's love affair with Hewitt had produced a child. That idea was powerful not because it was true, but because it symbolized something deeper. It symbolized rebellion against royal duty, the triumph of personal passion over institutional restraint, and the fragility of an ancient monarchy confronted with modern scandal. And so, James Hewitt entered not only Diana's life but also the mythology of the royal family. A man who began as a riding instructor and companion became, against his will or perhaps partly by his own design, a central character in a story of rumor and suspicion. His presence transformed whispers into headlines, and his continued relevance ensured that the rumor would never quite die. For Prince Harry, this meant that his very existence would forever be linked to a man who was never his father, but who became the unwilling symbol of a question that would follow him into adulthood. The story of James Hewitt is not just about an affair. It is about the way personal relationships are distorted by public fascination, the way individuals become symbols, and the way truth is often powerless against the momentum of a compelling lie. Hewitt's entry into Diana's world marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, but for Harry, it marked the beginning of a lifelong struggle against a rumor that refused to fade. To understand the affair between Princess Diana and James Hewitt, and by extension, the persistence of the rumors surrounding Prince Harry's paternity, we must first understand the depths of Diana's struggles. Her vulnerabilities were not hidden, they were laid bare before the world in ways few other women have endured. Yet behind the photographs, the public appearances, and the carefully choreographed gestures of royal life, Diana was fighting a private battle for her sense of worth, her mental health, and her identity. When Diana Spencer married Prince Charles in 1981, she was just 20 years old. The fairy tale wedding at St. Paul's Cathedral was broadcast to an estimated 750 million people worldwide. To the public, it seemed as though a commoner had been plucked from obscurity and placed in a storybook romance. But behind the ornate dress and the glittering ceremony, the foundation of her marriage was shaky. Charles was still emotionally attached to Camilla Parker Bowles, the woman he had loved before Diana and to whom he would return again and again. For Diana, this reality became apparent even before her wedding day. Famously, she recalled discovering a bracelet that Charles had commissioned for Camilla as a gift shortly before the ceremony, a sign that she was not the only woman in his heart. The years that followed brought little comfort. Life inside the royal family was far from the warmth and security she may have imagined. Instead, Diana found herself trapped in an institution that valued protocol over personal needs, appearance over authenticity. She was thrust into the spotlight as the Princess of Wales, her every move photographed, her every gesture analyzed. Yet at home, she was increasingly lonely. Her husband was distant, emotionally unavailable, and often absent. The courtiers and advisors around her enforced rules rather than offered companionship. The vast palaces she inhabited felt less like homes and more like gilded prisons. Diana's struggles manifested in ways both visible and hidden. She developed bulimia nervosa, a secret she kept for years before later admitting it in interviews. The eating disorder was both a symptom and a cry for help, an attempt to regain some sense of control over a life where she felt powerless. She also struggled with depression and feelings of isolation, emotions that were compounded by her awareness of Charles's ongoing affair with Camilla. In private conversations, she confided that she felt unloved, unwanted, and trapped in a marriage that offered no emotional sustenance. In this context, Diana's vulnerability becomes central to understanding her relationship with James Hewitt. By the time she met him in the mid-1980s, she was desperate for affirmation and affection. She was not merely a glamorous princess seeking excitement, she was a young woman searching for comfort and validation. The affection she received from the public, though overwhelming, could not replace the intimacy she longed for in her private life. Crowds cheered her, newspapers adored her, but inside the palace walls she felt profoundly alone. What made Diana particularly sympathetic, and what made her struggles resonate so deeply with the public, was her openness about her pain. Unlike most royals, who presented a polished image of composure, Diana allowed glimpses of her humanity to show through. In interviews and private accounts, she spoke of her loneliness, her struggles with bulimia, her fears, and her longing for love. She became, paradoxically, both the most admired woman in the world and one of the most scrutinized. Her vulnerability was her strength in the eyes of millions, but it also made her an easy target for gossip and exploitation. It was within this fragile emotional state that her bond with Hewitt grew. He offered the kind of attentiveness that Charles never did. Where Charles was aloof, Hewitt was warm. Where palace life was rigid, Hewitt was relaxed. Where Diana felt invisible, Hewitt made her feel seen. Their relationship was not merely about physical attraction, it was about filling an emotional void that had become unbearable. Hewitt himself once remarked that Diana was looking for love and reassurance, and he simply gave her what she needed. The affair, however, must be viewed not only through the lens of personal need but also in the context of immense public pressure. Diana was under relentless surveillance from the press, her life reduced to headlines and photographs. She could not step outside without being followed, nor make private phone calls without fear of being overheard. Her vulnerability was magnified by the knowledge that her every move could become front-page news. This suffocating scrutiny pushed her further into the arms of those who could offer her a refuge from the chaos. Yet the very act of seeking refuge became its own risk. When details of her relationship with Hewitt eventually became public, they were framed not as the coping mechanism of a lonely woman but as the betrayal of a wife and mother. The tabloids, eager to maximize scandal, painted the story in black and white: Diana as the unfaithful princess, Hewitt as the opportunist, Charles as the wronged husband. What was missing in this portrayal was the human reality, the crushing loneliness, the desperate need for love, and the unbearable weight of royal life. Her vulnerability also played a role in the public's willingness to believe the rumor about Harry's paternity. To many, the idea of Diana turning to Hewitt for companionship was entirely plausible. If she could seek emotional comfort in an affair, then why not believe that the affair had consequences beyond the personal? The rumor fed on the perception of Diana as vulnerable, impulsive, and emotionally needy. It transformed her humanity into supposed evidence of scandal. The tragedy is that Diana herself was painfully aware of how she was being perceived. In her famous interviews, she admitted to feeling inadequate, unloved, and desperate for affection. She spoke candidly about her bulimia and her mental health struggles, framing them not as signs of weakness but as the reality of her circumstances. In doing so, she humanized herself in a way no royal had before. Yet this same honesty made her an easy target for those eager to weave her vulnerability into narratives of scandal. For Harry, Diana's struggles had direct consequences. As her son, he grew up witnessing her pain, even if he could not fully understand it. He saw the paparazzi chasing her, the tabloids ridiculing her, the loneliness that lingered in her eyes. Later in life, Harry would speak openly about how deeply her unhappiness affected him, shaping his own battles with mental health and his distrust of the press. The rumor that connected him to Hewitt was, in many ways, an extension of the exploitation Diana endured. Her vulnerabilities had been weaponized against her, and through him, they were weaponized again. It is crucial, then, to see Diana's relationship with Hewitt not as the root of the rumor but as the soil in which it thrived. Her struggles made the affair understandable, her vulnerability made the scandal believable, and her openness made the public feel entitled to speculate. The story of Diana and Hewitt was not only about two individuals, it was about the collision of human need with institutional failure, about the personal consequences of a marriage that had become a stage-managed illusion. As Diana continued to struggle, the seeds of gossip about Harry grew stronger. Though the timeline made it impossible for Hewitt to be Harry's father, the public was primed to believe otherwise because the narrative fits so neatly into the tragic arc of Diana's life. A lonely princess, a charming lover, a child who looked different from his father, the ingredients were all there for a story that, though false, was too powerful to resist. In the end, Diana's vulnerability was both her greatest strength and her greatest curse. It allowed her to connect with millions of people around the world, to become a symbol of compassion and authenticity in a rigid monarchy. But it also made her the subject of relentless speculation, her every choice scrutinized, her every weakness magnified. And in the case of Prince Harry, it ensured that a rumor born of her pain would outlive her, haunting her son long after she was gone. The struggles and vulnerabilities that defined Diana's life were not isolated incidents but the context that made everything else possible. Without them, there would be no affair with James Hewitt, no fertile ground for the rumor, no narrative that could captivate the public imagination for decades. To understand Harry's burden, we must first understand hers,